Good morning. I'm Miss Carla. I am recording this video instead of doing it live. I had some trouble trying to do a live stream this morning, so we're doing the recording and I'll upload it as soon as I'm done, and then I will share on the Facebook page that it is available to watch. So I'm sorry if you were expecting a video this morning and had to wait. But you'll be able to watch it anytime after this. We're going to continue reading Ghost Squad by Claribel A. Ortega. These are getting pretty exciting here. We had to stop partway through the chapter last time, so, oh, right, the girls are going to level up and learn how to be better ghost fighters or something. Let's find out. Babette's backyard was enclosed by a dense perimeter of trees and hedges, concealing it from what she liked to call nosy Nellies. Strings of light spanned the width of the lawn, making the property look like Lucily imagined a fairy glen would. The pleasant aroma of lavender and rosemary carried over from the herb garden. Sid launched herself onto the cushioned swing that hung from an ancient-looking oak, almost causing the entire thing to collapse. Babette appeared moments later, 2 skinny flashlights in hand. "We're going to protect ourselves against evil spirits with flashlights?" Sid asked. "Hush, child. They're not flashlights," Babette said. "I haven't used these in many years, but they're powerful weapons. Magic weapons." "OMG, OMG, OMG, OMG," Sid whispered under her breath. Lucily wiped her sweaty hands on her pants. Babette handed one to Lucily and the other to Sid. "Don't touch any of the buttons," she said. "Just look it over while I explain." The flashlights were much heavier than they looked. They had a chrome finish and deep grooves that gave them a vintage look, almost like lightsabers. "I call these beauties my razzle-dazzlers. They are capable of stunning any supernatural being within a 10-foot radius. You don't want to get caught in the beam, though, or, Babette rubbed her neck. "Let's just say it wouldn't be pretty." Lucily's eyes widened. "Noted." "All right, now, careful not to hit the trees," Babette said. "There might be birds in there." "On 3?" Lucily asked, and Sid nodded. 1, 2, 3. When they pressed the button, a brilliant rainbow-colored light emitted from the razzle-dazzlers, casting a wash of pink, blue, and purple over the entire backyard. "Okay, off. Don't waste the juice," Babette said. "We don't have time for a training montage, but in my experience, the best way to learn fast is in the real world. Now let's go hunt some ghosts." Something in the air changed the moment they entered Tolomato Cemetery. It was close enough to freezing that even though Lucily had buttoned her Ghost Squad jacket all the way up, the hairs in her nose felt like tiny icicles. Even Macarena's firefly appeared to be shivering inside her mason jar. "It's colder than the mashed potatoes in the cafeteria out here," Sid said, her teeth chattering. Chunk mewed angrily. Babette positioned Lucily and Sid around a ring of flickering candles and instructed them to hold hands. "For this spell to work, you have to close your eyes. I want you to pour every ounce of good energy, thoughts, and feelings you can muster into the circle." Lucily closed her eyes and thought of her father. She thought of Mama and of Sid, of summers spent playing at the beach and of nights lying out beneath the willow tree, watching her firefly spirits for hours. She thought of curling up with her favorite book and a cup of the Dominican hot cocoa her abuela used to make. Waves of energy radiated from within her as she imagined pushing it all into the space within their held hands. "Open your eyes," Babette said. Radiant bands of golden light danced before them, intertwined like living vines. Whoa! Lucily and Sid were transfixed. With a flourish of her hand, Babette released the light, allowing it to spread out across the cemetery. Babette turned toward them. "There's a dark energy here, something dangerous. I believe the map has led us here for a reason, either to find the spell we need or to draw us into a lethal trap." "Well, now I'm feeling much better about this whole real-world experience thing." Lucily turned to Sid, who was nuzzling Chunk with her nose. "She does have a way with words," Sid said. "It's the fair's flair." Lucily sighed. Can we bring back the happy lights? Let's get going before the protection spell breaks, Babette said, as the girls followed behind her. I stored a magical item here years ago for safekeeping, and it might come in handy. Who stores their stuff in a cemetery? Sid whispered to Lucily. Your grandmother, apparently. Lucily patted her jacket pocket, making sure her razzle-dazzler was still there. Don't tell Babette, but I'm kind of hoping a ghost pops up so we can use these things. You're telling me, grumbled Sid. Babette halted when they came to an oddly shaped hill, too tall and narrow to be natural. She let her hand graze along the moss-covered surface, circling the mound until an opening appeared before them. In here. Lucily and Sid followed silently. The space lit up with a dim, warm light from the camping lantern Babette had brought with her, and Lucily's eyes slowly adjusted to her new surroundings. It was a small, round room with no outlet except the entrance they'd come through. Lucily ran her hand along the dirt wall, marveling at how the dome didn't collapse under the weight of the earth, when her fingers brushed against something solid. She brushed some of the dirt aside to reveal bones. Oh my gosh, is this a catacomb? Lucily sucked in a breath as she shook her hand to get the bone germs off her. Chunk mewed. Oh, yeah, you might not want to touch the walls. I forgot to tell you that, Babette said absent-mindedly as she walked around the room, eyes closed. Any luck with whatever it is that you're looking for? Babette held one hand up, cutting her off. With her eyes still closed, she held out her other hand, palm facing up, and tilted her head slightly as if she were concentrating really hard. Nothing happened at first, but then the ground began to shudder. Lucily jumped behind Babette, her razzle-dazzler at the ready. Dirt exploded from the floor, getting in Lucily's eyes and mouth, and she was pretty sure some of it made its way into her pants, too. By the time she was able to open her eyes, Babette was holding a shiny object before them. A small black arrow. That doesn't really look like a magical item, Sid said. What is it? This is a finder-keeper. It helps you find something, anything you want, by pointing you in the direction of it. Babette smiled. If we think of the missing pages with this in hand, we can find them. Come, we have to get to higher ground for it to work properly. As they made their way out of the catacomb, heavy footsteps bounded up behind them. Lucily and Sid turned, ready to attack, and came face to face with Chunk, literally. Somehow, Chunk had grown, so she was the same size as Lucily and Sid. Then, in a deep voice as smooth as silk, Chunk spoke. Run. Babette grabbed Lucily and Sid by the arms and pulled them along before they were able to react. The sound of a shrieking train barreled toward them from across the graveyard, hurricane-force winds on its heels. What happened to Chunk? Lucily shrieked. Why are we running? I think that if Chunk grew 5 times her normal size and spoke like Lionel Richie, we should probably just trust her and go, Sid screamed back. Lucily tried to keep up with Babette, who was a surprisingly fast runner, but her feet kept sinking into muddy patches of soil. A sharp pain pierced Lucily's chest. The air froze around them as they approached a giant oak tree. Babette stopped, leaning against it to steady herself. Get your weapons out. Babette took the lead, standing in front of Lucily and Sid with her hands up. Lucily held her razzle-dazzler up and willed her knees not to buckle beneath her. The night was suddenly deadly quiet, still. Babette's hands trembled slightly, Lucily observed. That couldn't be a good sign. Get behind me, girls, Babette instructed, but neither of them stepped back. We won't let you face it alone, Lucily said. All for one, and one for all, Sid continued, just as a giant mist monster materialized before them. Okay, Babette swallowed. On my signal. The creature charged, the air around it crackling with static energy. Every step it took shook the ground. Before it could overtake them, Babette screamed, "Give him the old razzle-dazzle!" Lucily and Sid engaged their razzle-dazzlers at the same time, sending 2 pulses of rainbow light, arcing out and converging with the purple beam of energy Babette had conjured. The mist monster vanished in a shriek of pain. "Where'd it go?" Lucily asked, spinning in circles, searching for any signs of attack. "Did we defeat it?" Before Sid could celebrate, the monster reappeared, attacking them so fast that none of them had time to react. Babette was no longer standing at the ready next to Lucily and Sid. Now she was suspended in the center of the creature's belly, at least where its belly would be if it weren't a hideous see-through beast. "No!" screamed Sid, pointing her razzle-dazzler at the mist monster that had enveloped her grandmother. "No, Sid, don't shoot! You don't know what that thing will do to Babette." Lucily's mind raced. "I know you're scared. I am too. But if we're going to save Babette, we have to be smart about this. You're not alone. I'm here." Sid tore her eyes from Babette, her face creased with despair. Lucily's hand flew to the fireflies at her side. She put her razzle-dazzler in her pocket and turned back toward Sid. "I'm going to use the fireflies to lure the mist monster away from Babette. Once it lets her go, only once it lets her go, you shoot it with all the power that razzle-dazzler's got left, okay?" Lucily put one hand on Sid's shoulder. "You can do this, Sid." Sid nodded, but Lucily could tell she was still terrified. Lucily hugged her before running out into the open to face the mist monster. "I need some help, guys," she whispered to the tiny lights in her mason jar. They flickered in response, and a surge of warm energy seemed to run from them to Lucily. "Hey, ugly! Over here!" Lucily opened her mason jar, and the fireflies surrounded her, creating a whirlpool of light. The monster turned toward her and smiled. This thing had Babette. This thing might kill Babette. This thing was coming right at her. Lucily planted her feet firmly, remembering the way Mamma's feet in the vision seemed to be rooted to the willow tree, how she grew large and was made of fury and light and love. She let that feeling fill her now, fire burning inside her heart. The monster barreled toward her, and behind it she could see Babette lying on the ground where it had left her. Lucily forced herself not to scream, closing her eyes and praying for her firefly's protection. A burst of rainbow light shot through the air and straight into the monster's chest, banishing it into the night. Sid collapsed to her knees next to Babette. "Is she okay?" Lucily yelled as she ran over to them. "She's breathing," Sid said in a small voice, "but she needs a doctor, or a witch doctor, or something. How are we going to get her out of here? It's not like either of us can drive, or even carry her for that matter." "I have an idea," Lucily said, before calling Macarena out. If the attack at the barrack was any indication, she could always be depended on to help. Lucky for them, she also knew how to drive, though that had been decades ago when she was alive. "Claro que sí, yes, I will help," she said once Lucily had explained their predicament. Macarena used her firefly magic to carry Babette, floating through the misty night to the car. "I really hope there's no one watching," Lucily said. "They'd probably be scarred for life watching an old lady floating through a cemetery." "If they survive the mist monster, they can survive seeing this," Sid laughed. "Go back to the hillside, you dolts." An icy chill ran down Lucily's back. "Who's there?" "The missing pages. The monster was guarding the missing pages," Babette continued. "Graham!" Sid was standing over Babette in a flash, stroking her hair. "Lucily, run, before the other ghosts get wind of the mist monster being gone. Here." She placed the finder-keeper in Lucily's hand. "It was pointing back toward the catacomb before that thing showed up. It's got to be in there somewhere. I'll be fine. Now go, child. It's up to you." Lucily took a deep breath, bracing herself before entering the catacombs again. Inside, it was pitch black save for the dim glow of her flashlight reflecting off the bones lining the walls. She held the finder-keeper out in the palm of her hand, as she had seen Babette do, and closed her eyes. Lucily concentrated on the missing spell, Las Brujas Moradas, the torn-out pages. She bit her lip, one eye still shut, hoping something would happen. The arrow began to shudder, coming alive and hovering just above Lucily's hand before spinning wildly. Okay, thingamajig, you're supposed to point me in the direction of the missing pages, and this is definitely not helping. The arrow came to a sudden stop, as if it had heard her, and was pointing to a spot directly above her. The rounded ceiling of the catacomb was completely covered in skulls. This is just the worst, Lucily muttered. She scanned the constellation of bones, looking for anything out of place, but the skulls all looked nearly identical. Frustrated, Lucily collapsed in a huff on the ground. Then she noticed that the eyes of one of the skulls seemed to twinkle. She stood on her tippy toes to get as close as she could to the glittering skull and saw 2 obsidian gemstones inset where there should only be hollow sockets. Aha! Lucily said to herself, grabbing a rock and taking aim to try to knock it loose. Her first attempt landed just 2 skulls over. She tried again, but the second rock hit even farther away than the first. Shaking her head, Lucily gripped another rock in her hand and took a deep breath, steadying herself. Come on, Lucily, you got this. Just pretend you're throwing a dodgeball right at Tilly Maxwell. She closed her eyes and pictured a bullseye in the space between the skull's eyes. When she released the 3rd stone, it hit the target dead on, and the skull broke free from the ceiling. Lucily picked up the skull from the ground and inspected the smooth surface, searching for any other clues that made this skull special. Aside from the gemstones, it looked normal. Well, as normal as Lucily had imagined a real skull would look this up close and personal. The gemstones reminded Lucily of the Goonies. She quickly tested one of them, thinking it might well be enough to help her dad get out of trouble with the bank. But the gems were fused to the skull and wouldn't budge. Lucily could sense a shift in the air outside the catacomb the longer she stayed inside. She held the skull as close to her ear as she could without it touching her and shook it gently. There was a faint sound of something moving within. Cold crept into the room now, and Lucily's breath came out in a white fog. The evil spirits were getting closer. She didn't want to break the skull, so she tried to pull whatever was inside out from a small crack. Panic crept over her as she struggled, her heart racing until finally she got a small scroll of paper out. Lucily didn't have time to attempt to decipher the barely legible script, so she stuffed it into her pocket and fled into the night. All right, that's the end of that chapter. So that brings us to chapter 20, page 200. And that's where we will pick up on Monday. And that means there are only 38 pages left. So maybe just a couple more sessions. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry again for the technical difficulties. And hopefully I'll be live on Monday, but if there's still a problem, I'll just record again like I did now. Have a good week. Bye-bye.